Welcome to episode 141 of the Daniel Yoris podcast with today's guest, Mark Young. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Joined here today by Mark Young. Mark, thanks for joining me, man. It's a pleasure to talk to you again here on the podcast and be able to share your crazy story, to say the least.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
Can you go ahead and introduce yourself, and without getting into the story we're going to really talk about, but who are you and what is it that you do?
Yeah, my name is Mark Young. I have worked in the fitness industry for 20 plus years. I work as a personal trainer, and I also do some fitness coaching for an online weight management platform called Sequence. So I kind of split my time between the two, but yeah, that's my main focus.
Have you always been a trainer, like out of school or whatever schooling you did? Were you a trainer right away, or did you have another career before getting into training?
Yeah, so I actually graduated from kinesiology, went back to grad school for a bit to do some, research in exercise physiology. Well, actually, I started in biomechanics and switched to exercise physiology because, well, physiology is less physics. So when I left school, I got into personal training pretty much right away, but I have done, some contract work in actually working in a bariatric program in hospitals, helping people with obesity. I've done a whole bunch of online coaching for a large company. I've worked at various places for personal training. So my career's always been in fitness / nutrition. But it's been a mishmash of various experiences that have really developed the philosophy that I have now.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, there's not many people who have been doing it as long as you have. And that's I say that in the most complimentary way possible, because we need more people who are more experienced, me not being one of them, just because I haven't had enough years behind me yet. But there's not many people who have been able to, one, just survive financially and business wise in the industry as long as you, and have really loved it and just been doing it the whole time. A lot of people have I was in an office job, and then I really liked the gym, and I wanted to get out of the 9 to 5, and then I became a trainer when I was 35 or whatever, and that's totally cool and that's fine, but it's a bit of a different path than hey, this is what I've always wanted to do, and I've been doing it, which is big credit to you for that.
Yeah, I have to say, when I was in grad school, my plan was to go the academic route. So my plan was finish my master's, finish my PhD, go on to teach exercise physiology in a university somewhere, and a little irrelevant backstory, but my father passed pretty suddenly during the process of me being in grad school. And that was a big eye opener for me. And I decided at that time, I really don't, I didn't want to be in the academic sphere. Not that I don't think that's super useful. I still find it really valuable, but I felt like my responsibility was to be out helping people in a more practical sense to better their health, so that maybe they wouldn't have to experience what my father experienced. And so that was kind of a big shift for me, but that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
Right. And at the time, I imagine that was a pretty bold decision, because, only in recent years has it become somewhat cool to be a personal trainer. But as young as I am, and for as little time as I've been doing this, when I decided to become a personal trainer, I had a lot of hesitations with saying that I'm quote unquote just a trainer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a this. I'm just a trainer. But that would have even been more years ago. Was that something that you struggled with at that time as well?
I had been doing it when I finished my undergrad. I started doing personal training for about a year before I went back into grad school. So it was kind of the thing I was doing in the interim before I went to grad school.
Right.
It was helping, complement my income so that I could afford to live while I was in school. To leave school to do that full time, surprisingly, I had a lot of support from my family. I left my master's program with maybe a couple months to completion. We'd run the study that, that I was to run for my master's. We had, we'd already collected the data. We were analyzing the data, running statistics, so I was pretty far along. So to leave, to go to training, you would think would have met a lot of resistance, but the people closest to me could really understand, I guess, where I felt I needed to be, and were super supportive. In retrospect, I probably should have finished my master's. Really, that would have been pretty smart. I toy with sometimes going back and wrapping that up, but yeah, I did surprisingly a lot of support.
It's undeniable that having those couple of letters behind your name definitely does matter. It's not the only thing. It doesn't automatically make someone good or more credible or whatever, but it definitely helps and could open up doors. But I mean, I'm sure at this point it probably wouldn't actually make that much of a difference for you. But in hindsight, I'm sure being that close, could have just finished it. If one of your kids was in that position, I'm sure you'd push them to just suck up the last couple months and finish it off.
Yeah, definitely. I'd probably just be look, you're almost there. Just nudge it over the line. I mean, it was a lot of work. And, every time I think about going back to finish up, then I think for the few $1,000s and all the effort it's going to take me to complete that, it's really probably not going to add much to my ability to generate income or do anything that I want to do in my life. It's just one of those boxes I left unchecked. So yeah. Who knows? One day I may go back and check that box.
Yeah, there you go. It's very similar to me, actually. You wouldn't know this, but I dropped out of chiropractic school with about 2.5 years to go. And that's, longer than a couple of months. But then at the time it was I don't really want to actually do this, but, having that doctor behind my name would have opened up a lot of doors and helped a lot. But I don't really want to do this. So is the, however many $1,000 in the next couple of years, is it going to be worth it? And, in my mind at the time it was no, and things were looking good. And then it's COVID took 2 years away from me. So it's well, in that sense, the 2 years doesn't actually matter in the grand scheme of things. But, anyways, it is what it is, all done. And, we just move forward the best that we can, which I think is a kind of going to be a central theme of the rest of this conversation. So switching gears, and I know that there's a lot to get through, so I don't want to rush into it, but I've heard the story a couple times. It's still going to blow my mind. But Mark, tell us what happened to you over the past year and a half or so.
Yeah. So, I guess I should preface this by saying I've been pretty active most of my life. So prior to this situation happening, I was strength training 3 to 4 days a week. I was doing yoga once a week. I was going for a couple hour hike, on the weekend. I was super active. But when I was 19, we discovered that I had a heart valve leak that would eventually need to be replaced. So in July of 2022, I went in the hospital to have this procedure done. Essentially, they needed to replace one of the valves, the aortic valve in my heart. The plan was to do something called a Ross procedure. They would basically open me up, do the valve replacement, and the plan was for me to go home after about 5 days. Unfortunately, they put me under, and I didn't end up waking up for about 5 weeks. So nobody really seems to know for sure what happened. The valve replacement went well, or about as well as it could have. They had expected me to wake up in recovery and in the ICU, and I just didn't. Somewhere over the span of the next few days, in my timelines are fuzzy because I'm basically going from a journal that was kept and my charts. But basically, somewhere over the next few days, they found that the right side of my heart wasn't doing what it was supposed to be doing. So they did an angiogram, went back in, put in a stent. Somewhere during that time, I went into cardiogenic shock and experienced multi-system shutdown, which basically means everything shut off. My lungs were failing, so I had to be put on a ventilator. My kidneys were failing, so I had to be put on dialysis. And eventually they had to put me on something called ECMO, which is essentially what I was told is the Hail Mary of life support. basically what they do is they put a large cannula or tube in one of your legs and a large cannula or tube in your other leg, so in your femoral arteries, I guess. And the blood from your body leaves through one of those tubes into a machine that puts oxygen in the blood and then circulates that blood back into your body. And that was responsible basically for keeping me alive.
Wild.
Yeah, so...
And that's just the beginning of it.
That's the start. I mean, that's when things were really bad. At some point, my pancreas failed as well. And if you're following along, the pancreas is responsible for producing insulin. So because my pancreas failed, I became temporarily diabetic. So they then had to start testing my blood sugars regularly and administering insulin. Again, I was unconscious, so I don't remember any of this. At some point or another, there's discussion about whether there is a spiritual component to this or whether medically something changed. All I do know is that at some point, my kidneys must have come back online. My body started producing urine again, and they're like, hey, there's pee in the bag. And we're so excited because, for some reason, after some amount of time, my body started to do what it was supposed to do. So that was great news. The bad news, of course, is that the things that were in my legs that were keeping me alive were one of the risks with those things with ECMO is that it can potentially cause clots. And my leg started to experience some kind of lack of blood flow my right leg started to experience some lack of blood flow to my foot, started going darker, and they realized that I had some kind of like blockage or occlusion in my lower leg. Somewhere in in the front of my shin, I started to experience something called compartment syndrome. For those who aren't familiar, it's basically where the blood flow in an area becomes really high to the point where the muscles can create pressure on the vessels that would run through that area. So essentially, I couldn't get blood flow to my foot. And in order to save my foot, they had to do something called a fasciotomy, which is where they stick a knife in basically up beside the outer part of your knee, and they just run it from the knee down to the ankle, splitting the leg open to relieve the pressure and let the blood through. Somewhere during this process, I also ended up with a 4-inch clot in my right femoral artery. And the blood flow restrictions in that leg ultimately resulted in the toes on my right foot just going black to the point of, basically just completely dying. So even though they took these drastic measures, they were unable to rescue the toes, essentially.
Insane.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess kind of the other thing at this time was, in order to be able to do these things on my leg, they had to take the ECMO off. So they removed the life support, but I still really wasn't waking up. So they decided to do an MRI or a CT or something to look at my brain. And they discovered that I'd had, a number of small strokes in my brain, as well as at one point I had some kind of like a clot in one of my jugular veins in my neck, which again was also problematic, right? Somewhere around September, so it was I'm figuring it was late July 22nd, 23rd, when I went in for the surgery. Probably end of August was when I woke up. Apparently there were times of wakefulness in the ICU where I was awake, maybe trying to speak, but I had like a trach, had tried to communicate with people. I don't remember any of those momentary points when I was awake until the end of August. I vaguely remember them asking me if I knew what the date was, because they often use that in the hospital just to see if you're lucid. And they say, they'll say, what's the date? And they're like, well, it's July 22nd. And they say, oh, I'm sorry, it's August 26th. So for me, the last thing I remember is them saying, okay, you're going to have this quick surgery, putting that little thing over your face, and you came back from 10, and I wake up and it's a month later. So for me, it's a time warp. And then they say, hey, guess what? All this stuff happened to you. And of course, that's just like mind blowing because, you can't deal with the lack of the loss of time. It's like a whole month happened, all this stuff happened, and I have no awareness of it, except for the fact that all the stuff that happened to my right leg resulted in my leg getting paralyzed from the hip down. So, it was basically just a floppy noodle. And, the plan, I guess, at the time was to amputate, but fortunately, we didn't end up doing that.
Very fortunately. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what that would have been like waking up, a month, 5 weeks later, and then having to come to terms with like, okay, they're not joking. Like no one's pulling my leg here. Like, no, this is real, and all this shit is on me and tubes stuck in me, and I'm sure there are machines beeping and people around me, and things don't look the same. And you said you had a big beard, and like all this stuff happened. It's like, what the fuck are we? What are we? How did this happen? And then trying to make sense of all this like, you know your stuff with science and the body and stuff, but it's like this hardcore science stuff. We have to do this and then this and then that, and like nothing's working. It's like, oh, but I'm here now, and then they don't know how it happened, or even really why you woke up again. Like there's so many unknowns here that are like pretty crucial to try and understand.
Yeah, it was like, there's so many like things I had to like kind of process. First of all, I didn't look the same at all, right? So, I'd never had a beard in my life prior to this moment, but I hadn't shaved in like 5 weeks. So I woke up with this crazy beard looking like Tom Hanks in Castaway, right? Like I would look at my foot and my toes are like black and completely necrotic. And I'm like, oh, are we taking these off? And they're like, oh, don't worry. We're going to wait for those to auto amputate. And I'm like thinking like, auto amputate? You mean fall off? And they're like, well, yeah, we prefer auto amputate, but that's basically what it is. So that was their plan. They're like literally going to just wait for my toes to fall off. Which by the way, I did not wait for. I was just dealing with so much. I'd also gone in. So I'd gone in at about 185 pounds. So I'm about 5'3" on a good day. So, I was in probably, the best shape I've been in a while. I was feeling pretty good going in. And, by the time I was on the rehab ward, I was probably down to about 140 pounds. So I lost 45 pounds really quickly. So like the first time I saw myself in the mirror, like the hospital gown is just hanging on you. You got like this huge, cut down the center of your chest from the heart surgery, the crazy beard, you just look like emaciated. It was just like really just hard to come to terms with that. Initially, but on top of the other stuff, because then you're also like, oh, by the way, we're probably gonna need to amputate your leg. So like your whole life just changes in what feels like an instant.
Yeah, because you woke up and that was great and that was awesome, but that wasn't like the end of it. It wasn't like, okay, fine, Mark's finally awake. Get dressed and go home, get a shave and on your way. It's like, no, this was kind of just the beginning of getting back to like just living and being part of the world again, right?
Yeah, like, people are always like, oh my God, you had all this stuff happen. Like that must have been terrible. And I'm like, truthfully, like those 5 weeks for me, I was asleep. I don't know. Like even when I see pictures from that time, I'm like, it doesn't feel like it was me. Coming back, like waking up was the worst part. Like everyone's like, yeah, you're alive. And you're like, oh man, it's better when I wasn't alive. Like no offense, but like this sucks.
Yeah.
And it was, I have a lot of feelings about that, but that's where the work began, right? Like as soon as you wake up, that's when you have to start. I mean, first of all, psychologically dealing with all the crap, the feelings, the emotions that go with that. Like my identity was tied up in fitness, working in fitness, training people, being an example to those people. And then suddenly I'm not that guy anymore. Right. And the doctors are saying, you're never going to be that guy anymore. Your identity, who you were, is completely gone. And like, you're just processing that while trying to deal with all the physical implications as well.
Right. I think that never being that is probably a little bit too harsh. It's just going to change how it is, right? You're still a coach. You still have all the knowledge that you had and all the experience that you had, and still can, give so much to the world. Maybe it's harder for you to demonstrate and for you to live those things, but you still are who you are. It's just in a different shape, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm skipping ahead, but like as soon as I was cleared to exercise again, like I was doing everything I could be doing to get back to physical activity, not because I felt like I, had to do that. It's just like who I am, right? That's just something that I do. And I feel like now, having been through this, most of the people that I train haven't been through this, but when someone's like, oh, I'm having a rough day, I'm like, are you having a rough day? Tell me about your pain and troubles and how hard it is for you to make it to the gym. Right? Like, not that people don't have pain and difficulty, but I feel like I have a different perspective on it than I did before.
Yeah. Everyone's pain and difficulty and challenges are relative. Like, a 10 out of 10, worst day ever for me is different than a 10 out of 10 worst day ever for you, and different for someone else, but still a 10 out of 10. But sometimes putting some perspective on it really helps. Like you can say, oh, like, okay, my problem's actually like not that bad, all things considering. Like I can navigate this and do, whatever I got to do. Prior to all of this, and like even any other earlier time in your life, did you ever have any major injuries, just like from sports or from lifting or from whatever, that really took you out for a while, that you had something to pull from of like, oh no, I'm just injured right now, I busted my ankle, I'm going to be out for 6 weeks, but where you had that mini loss of identity? I mean,
if you lift for long enough, you're going to have things that kind of derail you sometimes.
Sure.
Like your shoulder's just out of commission, you need to give it a little break, or different things like that, but nothing serious where I would have been like, I mean, not with the threat of potentially losing a limb, because that's like that's a big change,
right?
So I mean, fortunately, the doctor wanted to remove my leg, and they said, we need to remove your leg because, well, it's paralyzed. And I was like, I would like to keep it. I'd like to keep my leg, please. And, they're like, well, what do you think you're going to do with that? And I was just saying, well, I think I'm going to walk on it. And they said, well, I don't think you're going to walk on that leg. And I was like, well, you didn't think I was going to live either. So you're going to be wrong 2 times. And it's funny because the vascular surgeon that, that I spoke to about it at that time, like I still see him for various things like associated with some of the surgeries I had. So he's since, seen me hobble into his office and be like, I was like, remember when you wanted to cut my leg off? But, I wasn't able to stand without support at the time. I mean, my leg was literally just like a noodle. I couldn't do anything with it. So I did have to have a brace made while I was in the hospital that goes basically, they call it a CAFO, or a knee, ankle, foot orthotic. Basically, it is a brace that goes from my hip down underneath my foot, that straps in, has metal things that can lock my leg out so I can pull weight on it without collapsing to the ground. So
effective.
Yeah. So, but I mean, when I first got it, I spent, the first 4 or 5 weeks in the ICU. They moved me to like a cardiac floor to continue the rehabilitation from my surgery, or the recovery, and then moved me to like a rehab floor where I would begin like my rehabilitation and ability to walk and stuff like that. So by about month 3 in hospital, and by the way, 3 months of hospital food, not amazing. By month 3, I was, I got a brace. I was starting to move. But even at that time, like just to stand up and walk, the length of those bars, the bars you see in the movies when someone's relearning how to walk. I'm between those bars with the brace. And, if I'd walk the length of the bars one way and walk the length of the bars back, that was it, and so my goal was just like, okay, what's the thing in front of me? And can I do that with everything I have? And that's basically what I did. I'm like, okay, if I'm only going to go from one end of the bars to the other and back, and then have to come to my room and take the brace off because my leg is in excruciating pain, then that's what I'm going to do today. And, after a couple weeks of that, we went to using a walker. And again, same thing, right? Baby steps. And then moving to using I call them the Forrest Gump crutches, the forearm crutches. So they called them the Gumps. So I'd go in and be like, yo, where's the Forrest Gump crutches? And then, eventually, wasn't until I became an outpatient. So when I was discharged from the hospital after 4 months, when I went home and I started doing outpatient physio, that I was able to transfer to a cane and eventually walking with just the brace. As of today, so now we're probably about 15 months post-surgery, something like that. I can walk probably about 10 feet without my brace on at all. I can extend my knee, I can do a leg extension type of movement, not with weight, but I can extend my knee. With my brace, I can, go for walks. I'm considerably slower than a regular human, but I can do the walks. I can get around the gym enough to do strength training. I've regained, 35 of the 45 pounds of muscle that I lost. So I've basically spent the last 15 months fighting tooth and nail for every little piece of physical ability that I once had.
Right. That's hard. That's a lot. And it's not like trying to build a little bit of muscle because you want to look a little bit better, fit into a suit better, or lose a little bit of fat because you want to, look good at the beach. It's like you're rebuilding your entire body after, your whole life of building it, just to be able to do normal stuff and to be able to move and to live and be as normal as possible.
Yeah.
It's a different level of motivation.
It's funny. Yeah, it's funny? You would think that anybody who experienced what I had experienced would just be like, wow, I can't stay here. I need to get up and do what needs to be done. And this should motivate somebody. But when I was in the hospital, people were trying their best, right? But I mean, I was just, I want to say I was ferocious about it. Being ferocious literally just meant transferring to a wheelchair. But, I was just I'm walking again. That's all there is to it. There's no debate about whether this is going to happen. I'm doing it. And I didn't see or feel that kind of fire in all the people that I met along the way that were recovering from different things.
Yeah, no, I get that. It's extremely hard and extremely discouraging, and the steps you take to improve are so slow and so painful that for some people it just shuts them down. It's well, this is it for me. And this is one thing I wanted to ask you about too, is when the doctors are there telling you hey, we're gonna have to amputate your leg, and then you said, man, no thank you. Do you think that that's because they thought that was the best course of action? And this is no slight on them. Or did they think it was the best course of action, or is it that typically someone in your place wouldn't go through the effort and put in the work necessary to actually regain the ability to walk? Like the most likely outcome for someone in your position was you'll never walk again. However, it's possible so long as you like do the things that are necessary. Just those things that are necessary are like really, really hard, and most people don't do them. So what do you think about that?
You know, I can't say that I didn't consider the amputation, first of all.
Sure.
I don't know if you know Travis Paulin. He's a fitness dude, great guy. He has a, full leg prosthetic that he wears all the time, obviously. And I contacted him. He's very knowledgeable, very intelligent dude. And I contacted him and I was like, hey, bro, this is the situation. Where should I go from here? And we talked about, the possibility of prosthesis and all that kind of stuff. And it gave me some clarity, questions I need to ask the doctors and stuff like that. But I do think the doctors were probably just operating on a, percent chance of recovery, right? They're
Averages
probably going,
as well.
Yeah, average. Like they're just looking and going, yeah, like most people in your situation, they're never gonna walk, and that's just how it's gonna be. Fortunately, I had a few people along the way that were really supportive. One of the doctors that I had on the rehab floor was just like, even after I got an EMG on my leg that was saying like, there will be no recovery here. Like they measured the muscle activity and the nerves and just said like, these nerves are just never going to do what you need for them to do to be able to walk. And I went back just feeling so defeated. And my doctor on the ward basically, she said, and she, does EMGs herself. And she just said, you know what? I know what he said to you there. She's like, but I've been watching you every day, and I'm telling you that I still believe that you're going to walk. And, that encouragement, despite what the tests said, was like part of what kind of like kept me going. When I met my outpatient physio guy, I went in the first day and I was using the Forrest Gump crutches. And I said, do you think that I'm ever going to be able to walk with just a cane? And he's like, is that what you want to do? I'm like, well, yeah, I would prefer to walk without one. And he's like, all right, well, let's go get a cane and we'll try it right now. And I was like, no, I was saying after some physio. He goes, no, right now. And he got me up and I walked with a cane my first day in outpatient physio. And he goes, all right, so we're already here. He's like, let's get rid of these Forrest Gumps and now we're on the cane. So that kind of thing he was just like, he's like, you're going to walk. I'm telling you. He's like, I know I'm professionally not supposed to, say these kind of things because, if I'm wrong, I'm giving you false hope. He's like, But he goes, if you have like that tenacity, he's like, you're just going to do it. So, that was a huge help because I was working with him for months and, he was just like, even on days where I was like not feeling it, not believing it, he was believing it for me and just like, dude, you're just going to walk. So get up, stop being a baby about it, grab the bars, we're walking. So, yeah.
That is a hero of a coach. That is a bold move to be able to ask someone to try something that they're like, oh, I mean, in 6 months from now, I'd like to do this. Like, okay, let's try it right now. See what you got.
Yeah, that was...
And a pretty high percentage chance that you weren't going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I was pretty sure I was going to eat it, to be honest. But I already, took enough spills that I wasn't too worried about hitting the floor again. Right. I mean, at one point, apparently, I was a little bit not lucid when I first woke up from the coma. And at one point, I decided I was going home. So I threw myself out of my hospital bed onto the floor. So, I'd already hit the ground a few times. Yeah. I was... What's one more face plant,
Exactly.
But he just basically called me on it, said, let's do it. I mean, I was so lucky in physio. Like at the time I was there was this other dude. So like the time I just would have to go in, just always end up with the same people around. There's one guy beside me, he'd been shot like 6 times, like a young guy, probably in his 30s, been shot 6 times. So we called him 50 Cent. And we had this other dude had like broken his back doing skateboarding. So we called him Tony Hawk. And so it was like me, Fitty, and Tony. And, having that community there was like really fun. There's actually another lady that was there, and she was a bit older, maybe in her 60s, but she really wanted a nickname. And, but she had like a single leg prosthetic, like full leg prosthetic, but it was literally just like a post, like just from from her thigh down to the floor. And I was like, well, what's your real name? She's like, Peg.
The nickname made itself.
I'm like, I can't give you a better nickname. And if you're listening to this call, you're probably like, hey, you can't say those kind of things about people, but I'm disabled now, so I have like a pass. Once you're in this position, I think you get it's like you get a card, and then you can make fun of yourselves a little bit.
Yeah, it's also like, I would imagine in a scenario like that, not making fun, but making it fun is like a big part of what would help you to recover. Like an analogy I think that could be, relatable to most people is like with your friends, like we all kind of, we poke fun at each other, and it's in a good way. It's in a healthy way. There's boundaries they don't cross, and we poke fun at each other, and it's funny. But if you're not friends with someone, you don't poke fun at them, even though it's kind of harmless, because then it's just mean. But if you're friendly with each other, you can, make fun of each other a little bit, and it's almost like motivational, and it's a way to kind of build that community and build that rapport amongst each other, to help each other keep going, and, to make light of like a pretty dark situation for everyone in there, right? You guys are all going through some shit, and, to get a smile in there is definitely helpful.
It's funny. There's a dude that works at the gym where I do training, and, we always gave each other a hard time before. And then the first time he saw me, came to visit in the hospital, and he's like, bro, you lost a ton of weight. And I was like, dude, I was in a coma for 5 weeks and I still have bigger arms than you. So, I mean, that's friendship right there,
Exactly.
Yeah. I would be remiss to say there's the big lesson. I would say if you're following along and you take nothing else from this podcast, when you're building muscle, we all think about it in a couple senses, right? We look at it, when we're younger, we're like, I just want to look good, want to look jacked, I want whatever, I want to look a certain way. We do it for aesthetics. And then we get a little bit older and we're like, all right, I want to do it to keep up with the kids, and be able to keep up with what my kids are doing. And then we get a bit older, we're like, okay, I want to be able to avoid going, I want to remain living independently for as long as I can. And I want to be able to get up from a chair and get up from the floor and all that kind of stuff. Never once did it occur to me that having a certain amount of muscle mass would save my life from a critical illness. Never once was that in the plan. I wanted to be jacked. I wanted to keep up with my daughter. I wanted to, live healthy as I got older, but I never thought something really terrible could happen to me one day, and having this lean mass on my body will save my life. But having lost 45 pounds, the doctors basically said, if you came in having not had the muscle on your body, having not been as fit and healthy as you were, you would not be here.
Right.
So, the one thing I really wanted to make it a point to say was that if you're not strength training, you should probably start, because building muscle doesn't happen quickly. It takes years to develop, and building strength does not happen quickly. So if you're not training, you should be. And if you're a coach or trainer listening and you need to encourage somebody to do some kind of strength training, let this be your magic. Share this podcast with the person you're trying to reach, because for me, it saved my life, and I feel like it could be critically important to other people.
Yeah. I mean, great message. I was literally just going to ask you about how you felt about, all your previous life of training and how that positively impacted the outcome of this. And I mean, it sounds like, and not surprisingly, that it obviously was very, it saves your life, which is a hard thing to wrap your head around if you're just listening to this. But I think another thing to remember about this story, Mark, is that, you went in for a pretty like routine surgery. Like this thing is highly unlikely to happen to you, and something like this is highly unlikely to happen to anyone. And of course, I don't wish that anything like this happens to anyone ever, but it could happen. And so you better be prepared for it to happen rather than being sorry in the aftermath.
I mean, you might not get the chance to be sorry is kind of the thing. And you might, leave a lot of people wishing you had. I think the thing for me, the other big element for me was like all of the stuff I learned from strength training over the years really played into the recovery that I've had. I have a really simple approach to strength training in my mind, or into fitness in general. And that is like, decide where your endpoint is that you want to get to, break it down into the tiniest possible steps that you can create, and then pick the next closest step and aim for that one. No matter how big the end goal is, like what is the next tiny piece of the puzzle? What do you need to do to move in that direction? And then, so that's kind of like the one thing is like, what's the next step? The next small step I can do. And then my other mantra that basically gets me up in the morning is like, always something, never nothing. So it's just critically important not to think about what you can't do, because there's a lot of that. I mean, for me, there's a ton of things I can't do, but all I do is like, okay, I can't do that. What can I do to move me in the direction of that goal?
Right.
And some days it's like, yeah, I'm supposed to go for a walk. I'm supposed to work out. I'm supposed to do something, but I literally just can't. I'm physically or emotionally I don't have it. So I'm like, what can I do? Like there have been days, where I was in the hospital and the only thing I could do was like forcing myself to get up and get dressed that day and get into my wheelchair and go for like a zip around the floor and come back, because it got me moving. Like sometimes it's like I'm like, I don't have the energy or the ability to go do what I wanted to do, but can I walk around the house one time? Yeah. Physiologically, is that going to have any benefit whatsoever? Probably no. But psychologically, it's the point of like always doing the next thing, right? And doing it, always, instead of the all or nothing, it's like the all or something approach.
Yeah.
And as simple as those two things are, like that's literally, you think like, okay, like did that little thing help? All I can say is like a year ago, I was like in a hospital paralyzed. And now I'm walking and people are like, oh, you're an inspiration. I'm like, I'm not an inspiration. I'm literally doing shit anybody could do. Like you could do these little things that I did. Right. And, people will push back on that. I understand. but I guess my point is like those small things can make you into an inspiration.
Right.
Whether it's in recovery, in fitness, in anything essentially.
I think the thing to consider there is like, if someone hears your story from like coma to where you're at now, it's like, well, that seems like so far apart. Like you've made such a huge leap, but it didn't happen in a day. Like, whatever it was, September or October, what day is it? Today is October 26th. October 26th of 2023 or of 2022, maybe you took 15 steps. And then October 27th, you took 17 steps. And so it's like, it's not like you just woke up and then just jumped up and you're good. It's every single day, that little bit. And some days it was like barely noticeable what you did, like you said, right? Just a zip around the floor in the wheelchair, but it's not nothing. And like I call them 0 days, right? Not having 0 days where you just do nothing. And it's more than zero is very, very little. It can be extremely little. It can just be as much as like, a little breath work, a little meditation, getting dressed. Like it can be the most basic stuff, but you're not doing absolutely nothing. And so understanding like all of the steps that someone goes on in their journey, and this doesn't even just apply to this, it applies to someone who, you see a fitness cover model. Like, well, that person didn't wake up like that. Like they've been training for, you didn't see all the 10 years in the gym of them grinding and working hard and saying no to junk food and all this stuff to get to the way they got. Like you just see the end product. And so, yeah, it seems unattainable or seems like crazy or inspirational. But if you looked at what they did, it's like, oh, they just worked their goddamn ass off for like a long time. And that's how they got what they got. It's not magic and it's no trickery. It's just hard ass work.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is like, there's been times where like, I know if someone's trying to lose weight and they get on the scale every day, like they're not going to see progress every day. Mm-hmm. People know that. We know that logically, but we still do it. And like in this process, there's been so many times where I'm like, literally nothing is happening. Right. And I know like in my head that I have to just keep doing the things and then the outcomes are going to take care of themselves. But there are a lot of days where you're just like, nothing has happened. Maybe this is the end of when this philosophy works. And, and then I'll try something. I'll be like, hey, what if I try to walk without my brace and just use a cane today? And like all of a sudden I walk across the living room like, holy shit. Like all those things that I was putting in, like, the investment I was finally able to cash out that investment. But like, had I quit when it didn't feel like it was moving, I would have stopped where I was.
Right.
So it's not like I don't have those those days where I don't want to do anything, but I try to minimize them.
Sure. I think the valuable thing there, or the tangible takeaway from that, is that you have to have a proper measurement tool. Being slightly better than yesterday is not the ultimate goal. Like being able to walk without the brace, or being able to be fit in a smaller pair of jeans, or whatever it is for someone listening. It's like that's really the goal. So just because you didn't make some drastic change from yesterday, like maybe if you zoom out a little bit on like the time horizon to look at, okay, how much have I accomplished in the past 3 days? Sorry, not that much on paper, but how much have I accomplished in the last 3 months? Oh, wow, it's like a lot. Like I'm moving in the right direction. So maybe I can just keep going and maybe finding a different way to test what you're doing, right? Your analogy. Oh, I just took the brace off and I was able to do it. Great. A weight loss analogy could be, well, okay, the scale hasn't really moved, but no, let me try that, that old pair of jeans on. Oh, they fit now. Like, oh, great. I used a different measurement tool and turns out I'm actually like making progress at the thing that I actually care about. And therefore you can use that as positive momentum to keep going.
Yeah, I think, literally sometimes there's like just is no forward movement. That's what I've discovered. Like sometimes I'm just like, you just have to like literally operate on faith that even without outcomes available to you, that if you do the things that you need to do, the outcomes will take care of themselves, and you have to trust in that. And it has played out for me. I've seen it in fitness, of course, for many years with many people. But this is one of those things where there's high stakes on this particular game. And, for me, like just knowing that if you just stay consistent, things will happen. It's a hard thing to keep your eyes on, your heart focused on that, but that's really the magic, I think, is the consistency.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And pretty much everything that we're trying to accomplish, really.
Pretty much.
I think media has us believing that like, it's like the large, home run swings, the big actions that we take that are going to launch us into a whole new life, a whole new experience. And I've just found like, for the most part, like that doesn't happen. I hear like people talk like, Saul Orwell or John Goodman talk about people becoming an overnight success after 20 years of work.
Yeah.
right? Like it's like you invest, you keep trying, and then boom, suddenly you're on the scene, right? And people are like, oh my God, look how fast they rose to popularity. And you're like, dude, I've been grinding.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's really the case for most things, right? You just push and push and push, and then you just kind of, something just happens, but it's like those small things, not the big swings, that makes a change.
Yeah, you've got to be ready to receive the luck, or prepared to, seize the opportunity, or whatever kind of, cliche, insert your cliche there. But it's like, if you haven't even been putting in the work, haven't even been showing up, when that opportunity shows up and slaps you in the face, you're going to be asleep. And that's not how you get those big breaks and make those big jumps. And all of a sudden you look amazing in a bikini, or in a bathing suit, or in a suit or dress or whatever. You got to be putting in the work and the boring stuff. And that's the real work. It's the boring stuff. The boring stuff is the stuff that works.
Yeah,
one thing I did.
Why is it like that? Yeah, go ahead.
If we could, if we could make the rules ourselves, then I think we would have designed it a little bit differently. But we don't make the rules. I was going to ask you about you mentioned how some of the the rehab exercises is very similar to like the same principles of strength training, right? You're just training a different thing. You're not trying to do an Olympic lifting, but you're trying to like get stronger and taking another step, or taking bending your leg a little bit more, whatever it is. So can you talk a little bit? I know we're kind of winding down time here, but just about some of those similarities between like rehab strength training and like more traditional strength training, as far as the methods or training tactics that you've been using.
I mean, I think we talk about, there's this saying, it says something like, methods are many, principles are few. Methods always change, but principles never do. So the methods, or the approaches that we use to accomplish something, will always be different. But the fundamental underlying principles of strength training or building muscle or all those things are all the same and unchanging, right? And I just really tried to focus on whatever the principles were that would bring about the greatest results for whatever it was that I was trying to achieve. So, I have to say, like, a lot of the recovery in my leg and my ability to walk had to do with nerve regeneration. It had to do with muscular, regeneration, because my leg had atrophied a lot. So I just kind of went back to like fundamental principles, which was, we if you want a nerve to regenerate, you have to, try to send signals down that nerve. So, and repetition is very important for that. And I remember my physio telling me, like, I remember when I got there, I would sit on the edge of the table with my legs hanging down, and he goes, I want you to extend your right leg. And I would try to extend my right leg, and it would just like kind of hang there, maybe wiggle just like a quarter of an inch. And he's like, all right, I want you to do 10 reps. And I'd say, okay, I'm going to do 10 reps. And like literally like nothing happened. My leg just kind of sat there. And he's like, all right, your homework is to do like 1,000 reps. And I was like, no, but how many reps though, for real? He's like, did I stutter? I said 1,000 reps.
Yeah.
And I thought he was kidding, but he like literally was like 1,000 reps, like repetition is the magic here. And, I remember saying to him at that time, I was like, does anybody you tell to do 1,000 reps actually do 1,000 reps? Or do they just go home and like literally not do 1,000? And he's like, well, I think like out of all the people I've said something like that to, probably like 5 have done 1,000 reps. I was like, well, how do you know who those people were? And he's like, well, because they walked. I'm like, damn, bro. like, okay, I see what you're saying. I got to do my 1,000 reps. But I mean, principally speaking, the way you train to build muscle is, you pick the training that's specific to the objective you're trying to occur or to cause, right? So, you pick your sets and reps and everything in accordance with the goal that you're trying to achieve. In my case, it was like nerve regeneration. So I picked the approach or the principle that would guide that approach to rebuild. And, you pick the action that is closest to the one that you want to regain. So if you're trying to walk, well, you're going to spend a lot of time doing things that either are walking or emulate walking. In my case, assisted walking between bars and stuff like that. I guess what it comes down to is methodologically, the methods that I use weren't necessarily the same, but principally they were the same, right? Like hone down to like, what are the things that are going to help with the objective you're trying to achieve, and then just do those with consistency. Again, super boring.
Yeah, super boring, but that's strength training, right? It's like I'm sure I've referenced this on the podcast before, but I remember hearing a podcast with Charles Poliquin before he passed, and there was a question, and it said this person asked like any tips to get a really big back squat, a really big number on a back squat, and he said, "Oh, easy, squat once a week, really heavy for 10 years in a row, you'll have a big squat." I was like, "Oh, all right, yeah, that checks out. Makes sense."
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to sell these things. They don't draw people to like a podcast, like a Huberman podcast. He makes some elaborate claim. I feel like the stuff in fitness that works isn't the stuff that is, overhyped or, it's really not exciting. It's just, the people that are telling the truth are the people who are just like literally repeating the stuff you've heard a million times. You just need to execute the stuff you should already do.
Yeah. And it's hard, right? Like you doing 1,000 reps of like, and reps in air quotes, because your leg is not even really moving. 1,000 signal sends to your leg nerves is like not that exciting, and it's not really that tangible, but it works. And I think, the take home real tangible message from that is like your body doesn't understand reps. I think we get too caught up on like 3 sets of 10. No part of your body knows what the number 10 means. It just knows like how much signal input did I get, and what does that equal in a response. And so to rebuild your entire leg, that might take literal thousands of reps. In a normal fitness setting, you can get away with 3 sets of 10 so long as the intensity is sufficient at that 10th rep to elicit the response that you're going after. But we got to get away from the numbers and think about what are we actually trying to do, and that is to drive sensation or tension or whatever signal to tissue, and then it will do what it does.
Yeah, the most interesting thing, this isn't going to help anybody, but it's just a random fact. So if you're ever on Jeopardy, you're totally going to love this. So if you sever a peripheral nerve in your leg, for example, you would think that, there's a cut in the nerve and the body would just lay down some new nerve where that cut is, like the way we would patch a road, for example. There's damage in the road, you put new. What the body actually does is this process called Wallerian degeneration. So it actually just like degenerates the whole nerve from, the spine all the way down to the foot into almost like what I would consider like nerve soup. So all the ingredients are there, but like the nerves are degenerated. And then it rebuilds the nerve from the spine all the way down to the foot at a rate of about 1 inch per month. So I'm super fortunate because I have short legs. But now it's been about 15 months. So the nerve regeneration has probably gone from my spine to maybe my knee.
Yeah.
Right. So even the lower part of my leg, my recovery hasn't even happened there. So I'm in the process of Wallerian regeneration where the spine regenerates and rebuilds. But I'm like, what a stupid process. Like, bro, why didn't you just lay down some new nerve in the middle? It made me so mad when they told me that. I was just like, what do you mean I have to redo the whole thing?
Yeah, but it is quite amazing that the body can even do that. In these types of things, like obviously shit can go like very wrong very fast, but like it's also pretty amazing what we are capable of.
Oh yeah, like I was amazed, but I was also like, that's dumb.
Yeah.
That's a design flaw.
That's a design flaw. Exactly. If we could make the rules and if we could make the design, we would have tweaked a few things, but unfortunately, we just gotta play the cards we were dealt, right?
Exactly.
Mark, this has been amazing, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. I think that I know that I know that you tell this story with a smile on your face and have a great attitude, but I can only imagine how difficult this whole process has truly been for you. So I appreciate you, sharing the story and in hopes that it will help more people, especially the message about building muscle that could potentially save one's life. I don't think that that's something that is a small thing. So I just want to say thank you for sharing with us and for being here. First of all, what is the best way for someone to contact you if they want to, check out what you're doing, training, all that kind of stuff? I'll put in the show notes, but rattle it off here for us.
Yeah, so I guess the best place to reach me would be, I'm a social media junkie. I love posting on social media. On Facebook, it's facebook.com/MarkRJYoung. If you want fitnessy stuff, it would be on there. And I also post like a ton of memes. So, if you like that kind of stuff, you can also check out my website. It's Marked to Inspire. And that's probably the best places to connect with me. And if you're on my website, you can connect to Instagram or all those other things as well.
How do you spell your website? Marked, MARKED, 2, Inspired?
No, just TO Inspire.
Got it.
Marked to Inspire.
I'll throw it in the show notes for everyone.
Awesome.
Mark, is there any last message that you want to leave everyone here in closing?
I'm trying to think of something really intelligent to say, but I'm just coming up with dad jokes, so I'm probably just going to leave it there. But if you're not strength train. I feel like that's probably the best thing that you can take from this. And always something, never nothing.
Amazing. Mark, thank you so much again. I very much appreciate you for taking the time and for sharing with us today. Everybody give Mark a follow on social media. I will put the links in the show notes. Share this episode and really take to heart the things that have been said here and share it with the people in your life who you love, because this episode could quite literally save someone's life, and that's not a small thing to say. So share the episode, rate, review. All that stuff helps get the message out there. Follow us both on social media, and that's that. Go outside, be a good person. We'll see you next time.